Major funding for this program has been provided by the Letty Pate Evans Foundation and by the National Endowment for the Humanities and the Georgia Humanities Council. Additional funding was provided by the David, Helen, and Marion Woodward Fund, a Wachovia Bank-managed foundation, by Atlanta Gas Light Company, Georgia's largest energy distributor and Atlanta's oldest corporate citizen, and by the American Express Philanthropic Fund.
Atlantan Billy Payne heard a voice. If you build it, they will come. In 1990, Atlanta set out to build an Olympic village for the 1996 Games. This milestone follows 50 years in which Atlanta tried to build a big league city, a contender in the business of sports. Have we made it? Is Atlanta Losersville or a big league city?
Sports, it's always been, I think, a great equalizer. It's probably very good for our society. I'm not a sociologist, but I really think it is because it does make everybody equal.
Not so very long ago, social critics divided cultural activities into high, middle, and lowbrow. Spectator sports were definitely lowbrow. But even at this level, class distinctions were possible. Polo and yachting were at the top of the scale, baseball and bowling at the bottom. Back then, sports weren't serious. Today, they are. Some of them at least. Baseball, if not bowling.
Because spectator sports are an inescapable part of contemporary culture, we have to acknowledge their power and presence. In this program, we're going to examine the role of Major League sports in the making of modern Atlanta.
Drive, balls it deep, deep, it is good!
Today, Atlanta is a National League city. 50 years ago, it was a southern baseball town.
Back then, there was no shopping center in this piece of real estate along Ponce de Leon Avenue. There was a ballpark, home of the Atlanta Crackers.
To me, every day was a thrill to put on the uniform and go out. And let me tell you, these Cracker fans were probably as great a ball fan in new baseball. And all they ask of you was that 100%. I had a good year in 1954, the year I broke the home run record, but in particular that year we won the pennant, the playoffs, and we beat Houston in the Dixie Series, plus the fact that we beat the All-Star team. So to me, every day was a thrill.
Southern baseball followed the Jim Crow practices of the period. So Atlanta was represented by two teams, the Atlanta Crackers and the Black Crackers. But both were Atlanta, both homegrown, with traditions deeply rooted in the city.
Well, they had the opportunity to be in high school and be the bat boy for this fine 1938 Atlanta Black Cracker baseball team, one of the finest organizations ever put together. Great baseball players, and a lot of them hailed from this area. The catcher was from Stone Mountain, Jim Green. The third baseman was from Stone Mountain. The shortstop was a youngster just out of high school, P.I. Butts. The second baseman was Gabby Kemp, one of the most colorful young baseball players ever played a game. And the relationship between Mr. and Mrs. Harden and Earl Mann, who owned the White Crackers, was just superb. Whenever the Crackers was out of town, this area, Ponce de Leon Park, belonged to the Black Crackers. This was our field. We had the grandstand, and of course we had to sit in the segregated bleachers during their games, but we loved baseball so much that we supported the Southern League Crackers, and the Southern League Crackers supported the Black Crackers.
National League Big League Baseball came to Atlanta in 1966. It was pirated that year from Milwaukee. The original Braves date back to late 19th century Boston. Known once as the Bean Eaters, and later still the Bees, they made their home at Braves Field from 1915 to 1952. In 1953, they made their move to Milwaukee. The Braves' search for greener pastures began a national stampede. In 1954, the St. Louis Browns became the Baltimore Orioles. In 1955, the Philadelphia Athletics became the Kansas City A's. In 1958, the Giants moved from New York to San Francisco, and the Dodgers from Brooklyn to Los Angeles. In 1962, the Washington Senators became the Minnesota Twins. In 1966, the Braves quit Milwaukee for Atlanta. In 1968, the Athletics moved again, this time from Kansas City to Oakland. In 1970, the expansion Seattle Pilots flew to Milwaukee. And in 1972, to top it all off, the expansion Washington Senators became the Texas Rangers, with other expansion teams at Anaheim, Houston, Montreal, New York, San Diego, Toronto, Kansas City again, and Seattle again. The national pastime seemed both unsettled and unsettling.
Bucks brought baseball to Milwaukee. During their last season in Boston, Braves attendance dropped to 280,000. During the first season in Milwaukee, it soared to over 1.75 million. It exceeded 2 million a year from 1954 through 1957, a period in which the Braves won a World Series and a second National League pennant. Bucks brought Major League Baseball to Atlanta. By 1965, Braves attendance in Milwaukee had fallen to under 600,000. During their first season here, the relocated team drew over 1.5 million, and they enjoyed another 5 consecutive years of 1 million plus attendance.
Pride, too, was a major factor in bringing baseball's Braves as well as football's Falcons to Atlanta. The city's power structure had dedicated itself to transforming this regional city into a big league city.
I had known Charlie Finley a good while, and Charlie was forever moving the Kansas City Athletics out of Kansas City because he didn't like being there. I told him that he should come to Atlanta, see what we have down here. No one knew he was here. It was a very well-kept secret. The mayor met us the next morning, took us around, showed him the city skyline, and drove back to the present area where the stadium is now located. It was nothing but rubble and weeds and broken glass and bricks, and as far as you could see down to Georgia Avenue. It had been lying that way for about 4 years, urban renewal, and that's where Charlie Finley looked at the mayor and stood out there in the wind and said, "Mr. Mayor, build yourself a baseball park here, and Atlanta will have a baseball team, Major League Baseball team."
The authorized representative of a Major League franchise has assured us of the willingness and the desire in the form of a verbal contract to move their franchise to Atlanta when a stadium is properly assured. I can almost hear the crack of the bat in the Washington urban renewal area at this time.
With C&S Bank President Mills Lane and other business leaders in his corner, Mayor Ivan Allen gambled that if he built an $18 million stadium on the site Charlie Finley liked so much, baseball and football too would come.
The Finley thing was basically was my contribution to it, bringing Finley to town and getting the introduction and getting him to know the mayor. Though Finley's ball club didn't come here, the Milwaukee people were looking for a place to go, and it happened to be coincidental.
Pride of a different sort, the pride of race, was another consideration in making Atlanta a big league city. The major leagues, lily white until Jackie Robinson broke the color line in 1947, made uneven progress in integrating the game. A number of franchises, notably the border city of St. Louis and the Yankee city of Boston, were notoriously slow. Atlanta was the first and only Deep South city in the bigs, and it was especially suspect around the leagues and among the players concerned. For the Milwaukee contingent boasted a number of stars who were either black or Latin, people classified as colored into the early 60s when the color line cracked, then broke. How the game would be played in Dixie had to be much on their minds.
The very first time that black and white ever played any sports here in the South, even the Crackers never had a black player. You know, Atlanta Crackers, which was one of the Braves franchise, never had a black player. You know, the Georgia Bulldogs never had a black player. You know, Georgia Tech never had a black player on their team. So actually, you know, we were breaking in something that was unusual here in the South. You know, when you were moving a major league franchise and you were coming here with so many black players, you certainly was going to have some trouble. Not out of the people of Atlanta, but you have to remember that you're talking about outside of Atlanta. You know, you're talking about some little rural cities. You know, quite naturally, you were going to have there were going to be some problems. But I had no problems at all with any of the fans here in Atlanta.
The best that could be said for the Braves during their first decade in Atlanta is that they had their moments. In 1969, they won their league's Western Division title, only to be shut out in 3 straight games by the Miracle Mets. In 1974, the greatest Brave of them all provided Atlanta Fulton County Stadium with its greatest moment, when, on April 8th, Hank Aaron broke Babe Ruth's record by hitting his 715th home run.
Henry Aaron is the all-time home run leader now.
In '74, the year of number 715, Braves attendance approached 1 million. The following year, with Aaron traded to the Milwaukee Brewers, attendance here dropped to a little over 500,000. Atlanta Fulton County Stadium became known as a nice place to get away and be alone with your thoughts. In '75 then, civic pride was critical in keeping the Braves from moving to their 4th major league city. If Bucks brought the Braves to Atlanta, then pride has been what has kept them here. 1975 marked the breaking of the dollar line, as new owner Ted Turner broke with the baseball establishment and signed the first big bucks free agent. Turner also broke the front office color line by hiring the first, and so far, only black general manager in baseball, the late Bill Lucas.
He was the one that hired Bill Lucas, and he just, from all I know about Ted, as I said before, I've been knowing him for a long time. He is just, color means absolutely nothing to him. You know, he feel like if you can do the job, that's who he wants. You know, and that's why he's been so successful at everything he's done. You know, that's why the good Lord has blessed the man, because he has been more than just true and just an honest person.
The Turner era did mark a Braves resurgence. On October 1st, 1978, their pitching staff brought an end to Pete Rose's record hitting streak at 44 games. In 1982, after opening the season with a 13-game winning streak, the Braves won their division championship, only to be eliminated once again, this time by the St. Louis Cardinals. 1982 was the high point for the franchise. Outfielder Dale Murphy was chosen as the league's most valuable player, an honor he won again in 1983. And the Braves drew an Atlanta attendance record of 2,100,000.
From that, it was pretty much downhill. By the late 1980s, Atlanta suffered one of the worst attendance records in baseball. The team was eyeing yet another move, this time not to another city, but to another area of metropolitan Atlanta, exurban Gwinnett County. But the threat was short-lived because the promise of the 1996 Olympics brought the opportunity of a new stadium. An ultra-modern, state-of-the-art structure will replace today's antique model, all of 30 years old. Will the shape and character of this new baseball park make a difference? To the real fan, yes.
As long as we can have a new stadium downtown, I think it's a great idea, because the sight lines are really bad in here.
There's no question about it, and we'd have better participation.
We need better parking. Sometimes it's a hassle getting in and out of here. It's like to have a nice stadium we can be proud of to go to.
Atlanta deserves a good stadium.
New is always better, the way I see it.
I think it's a ridiculous idea. It's in better shape now than it's ever been since we got Reggie Williams in as a stadium manager. It's cleaner, and it's perfect for baseball.
The parking is a tremendous problem, and then the ingress and egress, I think of the words, from the ballpark are not good. Inside, the toughest part is the best seats, the box seats, the closest to the field, the most expensive. You have to walk so far.
They can have a new stadium if they put the teepee back up.
Franchise and stadium jumping were not limited to baseball. Professional football has had its spurts of relocations, some of them multiple. All of this nomadic activity made an impression on the Falcons. This expansion franchise, which opened in Atlanta in 1966, has had its moments, but very few of them. In fact, only 3 winning seasons out of the first 23 played.
I'm Mrs. Ashford Dunwoody of Peachtree Dunwoodies, and I am the new owner of the Atlanta Falcons. I would like to tell you a little bit about myself. Well, I was left with a rather large fortune, and my investment counselor suggested that I invest in something solid. Well, one Sunday I was watching the football game on television, and when that front line bent over, I said to myself, that is solid. You could crack an egg on any one of those boys. So I bought the team.
The Falcons might have been more inspired by Mrs. Dunwoody than by their real owner, Rankin Smith. During recent years, the only attendance record the franchise threatened to break was for no-shows, ticket holders who stayed home.
The management of the Falcons has been a near disaster. I don't think there's any question about that. Maybe it will get cleared up, I don't know. With Rankin Smith Jr. not involved anymore, because he was one of the sore spots in the management, on the management team, I've been told, and I think it's been pretty well confirmed.
Still, as sad as this record was, among the worst in football, when the Falcons threatened to relocate to Jacksonville, Florida, the city, county, and state joined forces to provide a new stadium for the home team.
Well, I'm sure the Georgia Dome will serve its purpose, and it'll be very widely and warmly received in time. But the idea of building it for the Atlanta Falcons is sort of ludicrous. 7 or 8 dates a year, plus the fact that the Atlanta Falcons have done very little for Atlanta over the period of years. But there are other things that the Dome will, other purposes the Dome will serve that I think will be very beneficial.
Not only would the taxpayers be buying a new stadium, it would be a domed stadium, the latest state-of-the-art status symbol for sportsdom. The Dome deal was done, and for the Falcons, such a deal.
Here's how the deal came down. The stadium would be built for a projected $210 million. In return, the Falcons would sign a 20-year lease, guaranteeing the team $6 million up front, $4 million in guaranteed annual income afterwards, and a deferred profit-sharing plan, which would net the team as much as $20 million over the first 10 years if the project ran well into the black. Furthermore, since running in the black was mainly linked to the success of the Georgia World Congress Center, the Falcons appeared to be in a no-lose situation.
Yes, you heard it here first, folks. The words Falcons and no lose found a way to fit into the same sentence. Atlanta sports fans actually rejected their winningest teams. The Atlanta Chiefs, a championship soccer franchise, folded. Hockey's Atlanta Flames left town and won a championship in Calgary, Canada. The basketball franchise held on. While the soccer and hockey teams were expansion franchises, the basketball Hawks were a gypsy team, but with a difference. In their heyday, they were to pro basketball what the Celtics and Lakers were and are: awesome. Originally organized in 1949, the Tri-City Hawks moved to Milwaukee and then to St. Louis. In their 13 years at that stop, they won 5 Western Division titles and the 1958 World Championship, with such stars as Cliff Hagan, Clyde Lovellette, and all-time great Bob Pettit. In 1968, they relocated to Atlanta.
After 4 years at Alexander Memorial Coliseum, the Hawks upgraded their venue by moving to the Omni, but downgraded their performance. They lost several stars to the ABA, and Pete Maravich failed to develop into the impact player they had hoped he would be. There were accusations he had been signed as Atlanta's White Hope.
So Pete was a marked man before he got here, and he, for a while there, I think he was really perhaps the first victim of reverse discrimination. But the same thing happened. The black guys found out Pete was a good guy, and all of a sudden the color wasn't very important anymore. He was a nice kid, and they treated him, as things worked out, like a nice kid. He was a very tortured young man, but a tremendously talented one. The Hawks never really reached the level that we thought they would reach when he came on. I think he put too much pressure on himself. He didn't know whether he was supposed to be a showman or a basketball player.
Still, the Atlanta Hawks have had their moments too, with the flashy play of Pistol Pete, the scoring of Lou Hudson, and a handful of games in 1973 with the incomparable Dr. J, Julius Erving. In recent years, under new management, Ted Turner's Hawks have been consistent winners, near or at the top of their division.
Well, the one thing Ted Turner has been able to do that Rankin hasn't been able to do is Ted Turner, there's no question in my mind, if Ted Turner was not in Atlanta and had not had this idea about cable television, the Atlanta Hawks, the year he bought them, would have been sold and would now be in Louisville, Kentucky. There is no doubt in my mind that that would have happened because we were not being supported by the fans. We weren't playing very well, so I mean, we didn't deserve their support necessarily. But it was a losing proposition. Tom Cousins wanted out. There was a real estate recession. And Tom was the guy, along with Carl Sanders, who brought the team here in the first place. So Turner stepped in and saved the Hawks for Atlanta, and that's a very positive thing for the city.
Their star, Dominique Wilkins, became the first Atlanta player to achieve first-name-only public recognition. In 1980's Atlanta, Neek skywalked at the Omni, in the company of Spud and Doc, in a personalization that said much about the game of basketball.
Spectator Sports tells us much about the making of modern Atlanta. Its civic culture, business drive, locational rivalries, and racial progress, or lack thereof. But how do we characterize Atlanta? As a good sports town, or as Losersville?
I think Atlanta's a great city. I've had chances to go other places, and I've just laughed at them. I can't imagine living anywhere else. I love this city. As for being Losersville, we certainly had our problems. I mean, our teams have not always been artistically successful, and I think the fans here are maybe different from the fans in St. Louis and in Cincinnati and some of the other cities. Here, if you don't win, if you don't play well, sayonara. I mean, the fans aren't going to come out and see you, and I think that makes the fans pretty smart.
I think Chicago is more of a losingville than Atlanta. We at least have been in the playoffs, you know, twice. The other teams, Chicago haven't been there, I don't think, since we've been in Atlanta. So when they said Losersville, you know, that's just something that I think that somebody just nicknaming, trying to. But it's funny, you know, the nickname Losersville come from our local sports writers, you know.
The image of Losersville is something that came out of our sports department. But yes, Atlanta's a good sports town. You're seeing a good example of it this very year. You give them a contender, you give them something to go to the stadium for, Atlanta will show up. You build it and they will come.
A good team, make that a great team. In 1991, our Atlanta Braves actually won the National League pennant.
We've come a long way since the Black Crackers and White Crackers, when in the 1940s and 50s, not just the players, but also the spectators were segregated by race. Becoming a big league city meant that integration would be taking place at a new level, that of professional sports. Now all Atlantans cheer Dominic and Dion, and they don't have to worry about sitting in a white or a black section of the stands.
Being big league gave Atlanta the status its boosters craved. That's why they rallied to keep even habitual losers like the Falcons in town. The city's leadership paid for its big league image. In 1996, the Bucks will definitely stop here. Officials estimate that Atlanta will be some $3.5 billion richer before the Olympic flame is put out. That, as they say, is a whole new ball game. And it offers Atlantans the opportunity to give the term big league city a whole new meaning.
The question we have to ask ourselves, 100 years from now, what will we look back on and say, we are the kind of city we are because of the legacy of the 1996 Olympics and because of what it left behind. And what we are looking for are opportunities to create a city that would prepare us not only for the Olympics, for the 21st century, and look for those not only projects, but different ways that we live our lives, how we can change our programs in the schools, how we can deal with problems of poverty, how we can beautify and clean up the environment. What are the ways that we can change our behavior so that when the Olympics leave and the hoopla is all gone and they're sweeping up the debris left behind, we will be a different city and we'll be better prepared for entry into the 21st century.
Major funding for this program has been provided by the Letty Pate Evans Foundation and by the National Endowment for the Humanities and the Georgia Humanities Council. Additional funding was provided by the David, Helen, and Marion Woodward Fund, a Wachovia Bank-managed foundation, by Atlanta Gaslight Company, Georgia's largest energy distributor and Atlanta's oldest corporate citizen, and by the American Express Philanthropic Fund.